Hi everyone! I keep getting the same questions over and over about the Shadow Impale Demon Hunter, so I want to take this opportunity to talk about some of the FAQ. The number one question by far is, how do I not run out of resources? People say, oh, I'm running out of hatred all the time. So there are two different ways to fix this. Number one is the Blood Vengeance passive. So whenever you pick up a health globe, you get extra hatred and also some discipline. So you can use this both for knives and also for smoke screen spam, which is very helpful. So when you are farming, when you're speed running, this is a very strong passive on a Demon Hunter in general, on almost any build. But if you have any kind of resource trouble, if you are speed farming, this is a very, very strong inclusion here. And number two is simply that you might just go on too low of a difficulty to really profit from the Kali's point. So you have to understand this Kali's point only gives you hatred back when you hit an enemy again after you hit it once already. And if you are going to a low difficulty where you one-shot everything, you don't get any hatred back from this. So usually you play the Fire Rune, and this one doesn't have any pierce effect like the Cold Rune, and it makes it a bit harder to keep up your hatred. But in general, when you're like strafing around, you throw so many knives and you throw 3 of them at a time, and strafe actually costs rather little hatred compared to just throwing the knives. So all you have to do is go to a difficulty where stuff is not always getting one shot. So small trash, etc. is fine, but in Elite, for example, if they take like 2, 3, 4 and like knife throws, this is kind of the acceptable pace, and you want to try to go to like, you know, some 2, 2.5 up to 3 minute pace for your speedruns. Another option that's really helpful for resources is the Captain Crimson set. So in my case, I actually completely skipped the Guardian set and went straight to Crimson, which at the start was mostly due to me not having the plants and then me not having the materials. And then at some point I was like 1200 Paragons, and I was like, yeah, I don't really have to start with Guardian set anymore. So Guardian set is really good until like 1500, 2k Paragons or so. I talked about it extensively in another video. And then you have kind of like more toughness with Guardian than, for example, with Crimson. And you have like similar damage, but you have like less utility because of the missing resource and the missing cooldown. And this actually also matters a little bit. So in my case, I can run with Topaz because I have enough cooldown anyway to keep my Vengeance permanent. I have resource on the shoulder that I can use as a defensive choice as well because I get damage reduction. And it helps me with more smoke screens, which again I can use to survive better, which I can use for more squads uptime. And I also don't have that much resource issues. So at least if you are going to progress your Paragons really quickly and you're planning to like outgrind the Paragon 1500 plus or so really early in the season, then this might be an option, just going to Crimson set right away. You will be weaker early on, but it makes everything easier and more smooth to play. So this is another advantage. Another thing that people ask me about a lot is the choice of runes. And I want to highlight this here specifically. There are only fire or cold builds and nothing else. You don't play the other runes unless we're talking maybe about Torment 16 farming with Ricochet, but you should just be playing another build in my opinion. So it's those two runes since the Season 25 rework of the Shadow set. So what you need to understand about the Shadow set is that the 6-piece bonus is not actually a damage multiplier. This is weapon damage added to the skill. So it actually amounts to a times 101 multiplier against the first enemy hit, and the times like 31 or 33 multiplier against subsequent targets. So it's 1/3 of the first hit damage for the AoE runes, Ricochet and Over Penetration. And then you have the Fire rune that applies a 75,000% weapon damage again with the dot. So you get 75,000 on the impact and on the dot, and the dot stacks. So this is where this double damage comes from the Fire rune. There is the Grievous runes, and again, this is not a multiplier, this is not actually crit damage, this is also just weapon damage. So it's effectively nothing compared to this huge number from the Shadow set. So this is why you play the Fire for either high single target or the Over Penetration for some AoE. And most of the time they kind of even out, so they're kind of close. But in the current meta with the Strafe included, you usually go at a rather fast pace, you usually have rather small pulls, and the Fire rune in general seems to work a bit better. But at the very least, when solo pushing on the higher end with this build, then Over Penetration might win out because you can just hit so many more targets, but you do less damage. And also potentially for like double Impale teams, you might want to try to play around this cold rune. So in some rifts, this will be better. In most other rifts, I guess the fire will be better, and I would generally recommend the fire rune. For the legendary gems, there are actually a bunch of choices. So my typical speed running setup in 4-man includes a Baneful Trapped, this is always there, and then a Baneful Powerful and a Zaze. So I do play this as a rather like melee build, so I'm always like quite close to next to the pole, so I can actually hit with my knives exactly on the elites and the stuff that I want to hit instead of throwing them everywhere. But you have a lot of buffs in the party, and the Taeguk is additive damage, and it gets like diminished value, so to say, from having like a ZDH and a Z-Barb that give you lots of other additive damage sources. So it's not really that great, but it's really strong, especially in solo when you don't have those external buffs, because you get a very, very high damage multiplier and some armor on top of it. So solo, I would replace the Zaze here and go with the Taeguk, or in a push scenario, I would actually replace the Powerful, I believe, and keep the Zaze and then go with the Taeguk. And lastly, the Baneful Stricken. So when you are doing any kind of high tiers, boss killing, and the boss takes longer than 30 seconds or so, you want to use this gem, and you would replace the Baneful Powerful, because again, you most likely have party buffs, so Taeguk not really great, and you most likely might run out of the Baneful Powerful effect doing a long boss fight if you don't refresh it right before, so you don't really have great value there. Another thing, when you're a Rift Guardian killer in high GR tiers, make sure you replace your area damage and also remove it from Paragon. You want to have exactly 0 area damage because you're not contributing in the Rift and you are effectively just there to kill the boss. So you don't want to lag out the party more than necessary by having area damage rolls anywhere. And yeah, just make sure that you have maybe like a replacement for 1 or 2 pieces where you might have some area damage. Lastly, some people have a bit of trouble with staying alive with this build. It's not really the tankiest. So first of all, always make sure you have your Shadow Power up. Always make sure you have your Vengeance up. So you need to hit the right cooldown breakpoint, which is 37%, at least in your character details, to have the permanent Vengeance. Like this, you already have a bunch of base toughness. And then there's also the Webs of Clarity. So if you're wearing them and not cubing them, then you want to make sure you have a high roll on the affix. That actually matters quite a bit. 40 to 50% damage reduction is a massive difference in the amount of toughness you receive, and you want to get as high as possible to the maximum affix. I can also recommend to run the awareness passive if you have any issues, and especially when you're doing like group speed farming, for example. Sometimes you might not have all the party buffs and your toughness can swing a little bit. Or for example, you click on a pylon with a Nemesis Bracer and a spinner pack pops out and they start spinning, and suddenly you one-shot yourself from the knife coming back at you because they reflected. So it helps in various situations. If you need even more toughness, then you should maybe think about replacing one of the damage passives with either numbing traps, so this can be procced from just the Baneful Trap itself and it helps the entire party, or the Perfectionist, which also helps you with more discipline. Aside from this, there's not really that many options besides adding more vitality. You don't really want to break like the focus and restraint bonus for like Elusive Ring or so. It's kind of a heavy damage downgrade. Very early on, when you're like Paragon 300 or so and you don't have much to choose from, this might be an option, but you definitely want to swap away from Elusive Ring as early as possible. Concerning your DPS rotation, you actually want to use Impale manually while spinning as well. So most of the time, your primary objective is to keep up reps and focus buffs from using the generator once every 5 seconds. So this has conveniently the same timer. So you always keep an eye on, maybe try to like get the muscle memory a little bit of how long this 5 seconds is. But you don't actually have to spam the generator. So instead, while waiting for the timer to expire, you can actually just throw extra knife between your strafe ticks to deal more damage. So as you are strafing, you will release those impales automatically when you hit enemies. But in between, you just tap the impale button. This works a bit like the Gold Demon Hunter, and you get more knives while the cooldown is not ready yet for the strafe to produce an extra impale knife. So there are some breakpoints involved, and there is, you know, some very in-depth mechanics that I'm not going to explain now, but you can effectively increase your damage output by somewhere like 10 to 30% or so, I would say, by throwing more knives in between your strafe ticks, then doing like a bola and then repeating. But I would only recommend doing this when you are not like traveling, so only when you are fighting in a certain spot against an elite or something, and you don't have to like, you know, run through the rifts anywhere. Only do it then, and otherwise, you know, just strafe, keep up your bola buff, and you're fine. This also means I wouldn't really go for any kind of important attack speed breakpoints. So this is not like the God Demon Hunter. We don't have any like good breakpoint here. I would just not roll attack speed anywhere. There are simply other very strong affixes on the other items that would take priority over attack speed. So I wouldn't try to go for any breakpoints. That's it for this video. Hope that you're having a blast in Season 27. And especially with this build, I think it's really cool to grind. It's really fun. I believe it's actually the most popular choice, at least from what I can tell from people coming and asking about it. And yeah, it just seems like a lot of people are playing Demon Hunter. And I hope I could help you a little bit with this video if you were already playing the build. If you want to see more of the build, if you want to see like the full guide, I have it on Maxwell in the written version. I have a video, so you can see more to details there about how to set it up, what are the important items, how everything works, and so on. Hope you enjoyed this video. I wish you good luck and see you guys next time.